Norm Macdonald, who was on SNL.
Oh, yeah.
And he always used to say, you can't do an impression of someone if you don't like them. He did David Letterman, and he did the famous like Burt Reynolds, where he's on
he's great
Jeopardy.
At Burt Reynolds. He was a master at Burt Reynolds, chewing his gum.
And Norm liked both those people.
Yeah.
So anytime Norm would do an impression, he enjoyed and he liked the person. And I think what we're seeing now, it's like not even satire. If you're looking at like popular media right now, when they're doing an impression of, let's say, Trump, very few comedians I think are doing it from a place of like, I'm trying to make you laugh and I don't mean anything bad by this impression. I think like Alec Baldwin's SNL impression of Trump was...
Which is really good. He does a great job, but yeah, it's pretty kind of dark and sinister.
Yeah, you can see that there's something beneath that.
We believe that you are strong by design, and you were made in God's image to have a strong body, mind, and spirit. You're listening to the #1 Strength and Health Authority podcast in the world. So let's get ready to unlock your potential and transform your life in today's episode.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Strong by Design podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in, for joining us. We have a fun panel of contestants on today's show. I'll call it contest. It's going to be an interesting conversation. This is a conversation that I thought would be wise to have, or at least timely. And I don't know. We might be second guessing ourselves after this. We do have pretty much our entire human resource team here today. So hopefully we keep everything under wraps. I think we'll be very respectful here on the Strong by Design podcast of each other's opinions. And that's what this is. It's just a conversation. It's not to get everyone's feathers ruffled up, but to actually be good listeners and see where we're all coming from in an age where people can't seem to even have a conversation without getting to the boiling point or really kind of turning the sides away from each other, thus the title of the episode. So listeners who have been coming back and downloading, we just thank you so much for the continuous support and the sharing of our shows. Obviously, we kind of talk about all things here on the Strong by Design podcast. Some days it's purely health and fitness, sometimes faith, sometimes a blend. We've been doing a lot of entrepreneurial and leadership episodes, and I think we've just continued to find great guests and had some great internal conversations. So thank you for supporting us. And for you new listeners, welcome. Hope you continue to come back. There's a lot of past episodes, hundreds and hundreds of them for you to go back and listen to, and most of them are evergreen. So thank you so much. So our guest today here on Strong by Design, the very beautiful Samantha Harrison, who has been on the show a few times before, executive assistant here at Critical Bench. The one and only, the grand poobah of operations, Mr. Tim Nixon. Come on, bring it, and pastor. So, that's always good. So no cursing probably from this guy.
Hopefully not.
Hopefully not. And then the one and only, our content marketing guru, Mr. David Sautter, who has been on the show at least one other time.
One other time.
Yeah, so it's good to have you back. Thank you for saying yes.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
People were a little bit tentative on this one, right? They're like, is my job on the line if I go on this show?
Well, my paycheck was on the line.
Your paycheck was on the line.
I had to sit down here.
I think this will be fun. So let's just go first. Let's just go around the horn with a couple of basic, kind of superficial, if you will, types of things that are quickly answered. If we went back about 250 years to kind of the birth of our country, and our forefathers saw where we are right now, what do you think their initial reaction would be? Like just Sam, what do you think? What would they say?
Honestly, I think they would consider us to be in a fairly similar place to where they started, considering the American government and what that looked like. I think, what they would see today is people standing up for what they believe in, fighting for their freedoms and whatever that means for them, and ultimately just America trying to create a better America for each other but there's just the differing opinions and beliefs, and it just makes it more difficult to see any commonality outside of just everybody trying to make America better. I don't think they would be surprised or shocked by any means. I think they would actually be pretty proud that America and Americans are still continuing to fight for the American dream and for the government and for the betterment of America in general.
Okay, all right. That's a good response, good take. Tim, same question.
Well, I'd say like most things in life, it'd be a pretty mixed bag. I mean, on one hand, I think a lot of them would be surprised that it's lasted this long. And it's a tough thing to see democracy last this long. So in that regard, I think they'd be very proud. I mean, other things I'm sure they'd be sad to see. I know like Washington was against the idea of having solely a two-party system, and yet here we are. So in all things, I think they'd be proud of what they did and the legacy that is America. But certainly I think in hindsight, they'd also be like, oh, well, we could have put these safeguards in place or this thing. But at the end of the day, I do agree with Sam, though. There is that element of reality hits, and a lot of democracies have fallen. So I think they'd be proud of what they created.
Wow, cool. David, what's
Yeah,
your take?
I really like what Sam said. I think you have to split the question into two parts, right? Because you have the people, then you have the representatives. So I like what Sam said, like we're all fighting for the freedoms that we want. Maybe it doesn't exactly coincide with each other, but we're still fighting. And I think that's a right that we have that people take for granted. I think a lot of people don't realize that if they try to do a lot of the protesting, for example, in the United States and in certain other countries, you would be behind bars.
Right.
I mean, the same day. As far as the leadership part of it, I don't know if the founding fathers, someone like Washington, for example, would really agree with what we're doing. I'm a big believer, and I think Washington is a great example of this. Is like it's the last guy who wants to be in office that should be in office.
Right.
I mean, if you think about Washington, they literally had to force him to be president, and he didn't want to.
They want him to be king.
Yeah.
And he's like, I'm not here for kingdom.
Yeah. I mean, all he wanted to do was just go and farm and just be a regular guy, but they literally had to drag him in for even a second term, I think it was. So I think, to Sam's point, I think they'd be proud that we're able to still fight, that we still have these rights and these freedoms to fight. As far as the leadership part of it, I don't think they would be quite happy with that part.
Right. Well, that's the trouble you face with a democratic republic, right? A republic means that you have representation, right? It's not the people necessarily, but it's people kind of hired to be the voice of the people, to represent the people, and that can get challenging. But I think a lot of the people would. I don't know what our country would look like if we didn't have it in place. It would probably be a disaster, and we wouldn't be here right now. Wouldn't have lasted this long. Certainly, no. That's good. It's good feedback. I appreciate you guys kind of. Because these questions were posed a little bit ahead of time, so you probably processed and thought about it for a minute, so it's good. Being that it's a two-party system, it's hard to get around that, right? Like they've tried to introduce this independent, this third party, and it doesn't seem to work. It's not sticking. What do you guys think when it comes to, you really only have two choices at the end of the day? They go through a pool of 15 or so people on each side, and eventually it comes down to one representative for each side. Do you think that model has been the model for a long time? Is that something that you would like to see changed? I mean, how could it be, though? It's kind of like you have... I don't know. It's like everybody has a favorite color, right? But then eventually you got to boil it down to two rather than just being able to pick your favorite. And then is it worth picking your favorite still, even though that won't necessarily even count? I guess that's my other thought. Because it's like a throwaway vote in a lot of ways. If you vote for somebody that has no possible opportunity to get picked, you're just not. You know it going into it. Like, I'm going to vote for somebody that actually won't be able to win. Is that a disservice almost to the process? And eventually it comes down to just picking the platform that most aligns with your values rather than the person that's at the top of the ballot. Your thoughts, anyone?
I would say it would depend on the purpose of why you're voting third party. So if your intent is ultimately maybe to cast a what I would almost call a protest vote because neither party has done a good job of winning over your vote, and that's maybe why you're voting for a third-party candidate,
Sure.
then absolutely I think it's effective because I know a lot of people who are disenfranchised with both parties. Now, to your point, is it realistic for a third-party person to get elected? No, not at this point at least. So if your vote is to actually elect someone, then yeah, it's probably not effective and it is being thrown away.
So at the end of the day, someone's getting elected.
Oh, sure.
And it's probably going to be a Republican or a Democrat, 99.9%.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, I guess you could always leave the 0.0001 that all of a sudden everyone goes out after the polls show this and then everyone votes for a third person. But I don't see that happening. So I get it. I guess I understand what you're saying. Like,
Yeah.
It's almost like it's a vote to say, I don't like either person, so I'm going to vote for this third option that has no possibility of winning. But
if Kennedy were still in the race, for instance, and running, if you were voting to see Kennedy end up in the White House, you were probably throwing away your vote. If you were voting for Kennedy to tell the Democrats and to tell Republicans that you have not done a good job at meeting my needs or addressing the issues I face on a daily basis. And this is ultimately you saying, I still want to be part of the voting process, but I want to show you guys that you didn't actually earn my vote. Then I think it's effective, but really only in those instances.
I'm glad you brought up Kennedy because I think he represents exactly what's wrong with everything. So I think with RFK, for example, his own party turned against him, and then he's one example, but I think this has happened with multiple third-party candidates. I think the biggest reason that third-party candidates aren't taken seriously, RFK being one example, and then Rand Paul, a few other ones.
Ron Paul.
Thank you, Ron Paul.
yeah, Ron Paul.
I was close.
No,
I was close.
Well, it was at the
Not Rand Paul.
No,
Ron
because
Paul.
he's Rand Paul is a senator.
Yeah,
That's his son.
That's his son. Yeah, Ron Paul. Right.
Yeah, so I remember Ron Paul. I remember Ross Perot.
Sure.
And then you got RFK.
Remember those years?
Yeah.
And that voice, he had that crazy Texan voice.
I think the reason why these guys don't get taken seriously is because they don't have the same airtime. I mean, think about with the first debate. You had Trump and you had Biden, okay? And it was sponsored by CNN, if I remember correctly. And they tried to say that RFK didn't qualify, even though he did qualify. He had enough votes, he had enough signatures.
Yes.
He was allowed to be in that debate, but they wouldn't let him. And that speaks to a bigger issue is why they're not letting these third-party candidates in. You know, and I believe it has to do with them completely rocking the boat if they were allowed on that debate stage. If RFK, with his talking points, was allowed on the debate stage, we would have had a completely different, I think, outcome by this time, with RFK. But he, didn't get the airtime. He wasn't taken seriously, and then was, pillaged by all these things with the brain worm and the deer in the park and all these things. But no one was actually talking about his actual policies.
That's right.
No matter which side of the coin you're on, whether you're listed as a Republican or a Democrat, I think we can all agree, it's not, if you have someone who qualifies and who really wants what's best for the American people and with their policies, what they believe is best, they should have a chance to speak. I mean, that's what democracy is. And when you're intentionally forcing a candidate out, I mean, what is that exactly? Does that go against everything that we stand for?
Right. No, I agree. It's dangerous, and it doesn't seem to follow. It's like it's following a narrative. It's almost like that was predetermined. It's like, no, we're not going to let you in. We don't want you in. It really comes down to control and people who have the money. These big corporations, right, and big pharma and big media and all this stuff, and they can kind of paint the picture with their own brushes and really disseminate the news and the information the way that they want to, right? And I think that's a huge problem too, is the news outlets, and that's why the news outlets have lost a lot of popularity and a lot of respect in recent times. I would say probably in the last 5 to 10 years, because they're so one-sided, one way or the other.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so people are going elsewhere for their news. They're going to podcasts. They're going to other platforms, to websites. They're going to these individual public accounts and social media for their information. Sam, do you have any input on that?
I mean, back to the voting third party
right.
being wasted. I mean, I've been accused of wasting my own vote because I've voted third party for quite a while now. But I don't consider it a wasted vote because I voted with my beliefs and value systems in mind. And at that time, to get a little bit more forward progress going on that, you have to get 5% of the vote in a presidential election. It's 5%, and then there's next steps that can happen.
Right.
But we've never gotten to that 5%.
Correct.
Because everybody thinks that a third-party vote is wasted. So that rhetoric needs to change in order to make any kind of difference in bringing a true third party into the mix, or fourth and fifth party for that matter. That's my opinion. I would love to see the two-party process dissolve and more influencers come in. In regards to like CNN's debates and stuff, we have so many different media outlets now. Like, why can't we, just for example, why couldn't we host our own debate with as many people as we wanted to bring in? But Trump is never going to come here. Biden, Harris, nobody's going to come here big enough because we're not a big enough platform to, in their opinion,
garner enough interest.
Right. So I think that's part of a challenge too. I'm not saying that our Kennedy was, purposefully or not purposefully dismissed. I don't know. I don't know what their guidelines were for holding that debate. But I think that there are so many different avenues now that could allow for debate for more platforms, for more people who would like to run for president. They just need a bigger voice and, unfortunately, a bigger campaign budget. I would love to see caps on campaigns, but money
the
runs
money
the
dictates.
world.
And I mean, you see it in all things in sports, right? Who are the two teams vying right now for the World Series? The two biggest budget baseball teams in the mix, and that not always the case, right? It's not. They weren't in the World Series last year. However, when you have a little bit more to spend to keep the best players, you're going to probably. So these news media outlets and big pharma and all these platforms that have all the money and are big donators or big contributors and sponsors of one side or the other, right? That you can't compete. Right. You can't compete. They were talking about somebody that had another potential candidate. I think it was Trump talking about somebody that was trying to be part of the RNC, the Republican convention. And they had like $250 million, and that wasn't even. That was like a drop in the bucket for a budget to be able to get out there, to get their name out there, and to actually have a shot. But there's just so much involved in it, and it really does come down to the money part, which is sad because there's some people, really smart people, really qualified people, really good people, I think, who could do something amazing for this country. And they don't get the voice or the platform they need. It all comes down to the big players that have the budget for it.
Yeah.
So.
Well, hopefully with time we can. We'll get into the budget later, I'm sure, and some of the money issues. But to Sam's point, I will say one little sliver of optimism I have is I do think the traditional media outlet gatekeepers that help kind of keep this two-party system in place, I think are starting to change. I mean, even the fact that both major candidates have been willing to go on various smaller podcasts. Granted, it might be their own audiences and whatnot, but the moment you begin opening that door, the more people will start listening to your, Bobby Kennedy's on Joe Rogan or whomever, or maybe this podcast one day. That'd be pretty neat, but I think the more you begin to see that wall break down and there's no longer these big gatekeepers, the more hopefully we'll be able to hear from some of these other candidates.
Agreed.
Even if it doesn't remove the two-party system, I think it will further open the door for the primaries of the two-party system.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah. If you go back, dating myself slightly, but if you go back into the 90s, I'm just going there because I was eligible to vote for Clinton's first term. Okay. Second term. And he became president when I was in high school, and as I graduated high school. And I remembered that was my first vote. Was I cast? Even I considered myself probably a Republican at the time because that's what my parents were. I think I voted for Clinton for the second term as my first vote. I'm trying to remember who he was. Oh, was he running against? No. I'm trying to think of who his running mate was. Anyway, but if you go back to that time and Saturday Night Live and some of the other kind of sarcastic, fun, comedic outlets and shows that were out there back then, people, it almost like you could joke about the candidates and you could laugh about it. And no one took it to heart. It didn't seem like it was so divisive at the time. It seemed like you could laugh at your own pick, you could laugh at the other guy, and it seemed like they didn't necessarily even hate each other, these two people. Maybe they were actually friends. They just had differing opinions on the big issues, and so they were on two different parties. And that divide just from that point on, and maybe it's because of my age, I started to see that division grow. And it just seems like it's just gotten bigger and bigger and bigger over the last 3 decades since then. But if you go back to then, I feel like a lot of the people in government in D.C. and elsewhere could actually just get together and go to be friends and shake hands and be more, democratic, if you will. And now it just seems so hateful. And I don't know if some of it's a show and some of it's not real. Or we're just shown certain things. But do you guys have any thoughts on that? This division, and do you feel like it's a real thing for your life? Because in my life, I don't see it. I don't feel that way in my own personal life. But what's kind of displayed, the narrative that's painted in media, feels like these people are so far apart. They'll never come together on anything. Mm-hmm. Any insights on that? Anyone?
I think if you ask most people, I would say most people are probably moderate, right down the middle.
Yeah, a little bit left or a little bit right.
Right.
Yeah.
I think these extremes that we're seeing are really just crafted narratives. But I also think back to your point about SNL and just like how media treated politicians. And it brings me back to like Norm Macdonald, who was on SNL.
Oh yeah.
And he always used to say, you can't do an impression of someone if you don't like them. So he did David Letterman, and he did the famous like Burt Reynolds, where he's on
he's great
Jeopardy.
At Burt Reynolds. He was a master at Burt Reynolds, chewing his gum.
And Norm liked both those people.
Yeah.
So anytime Norm would do an impression, he enjoyed and he liked the person. And I think what we're seeing now is just people doing impressions of politicians in particular or other celebrities where there's like a lot of like, I think hate might be too strong of a word, but definitely a dislike. Mockery, yeah. And it's like not even satire because,
It's not like someone doing an Arnold impression, right? Where I'm not going to start doing an Arnold impression, but a lot of people like enjoy his movies and a lot of things about him. So when they do it, it's out of like a love or a fondness of him, rather than, like you said, mockery or almost being a little bit. It's coming from a negative place.
Yeah, and I think no matter how you feel about whatever candidate or what side of the fence you're on, I think we can all agree that if you're looking at like popular media right now, when they're doing an impression of, let's say, Trump. Very few comedians, I think, are doing it from a place of like, I'm trying to make you laugh, and I don't mean anything bad by this impression. I think like Alec Baldwin's SNL impression of Trump was...
Which is really good. He does a great job, but it's pretty kind of dark and sinister.
Yeah, you can see that there's something beneath that.
Yeah.
And I think not being able to joke, not being able to talk about something like we're doing right now, no matter what side of the fence you're on, and not being able to joke about it, for the sake of satire and just making each other laugh, I think that's a slippery slope. But but to come full circle, I think most of us are moderate. I think we agree more than we disagree, but I think we're seeing the very, very vocal minorities who are just screaming. And then, of course, social media blows that up.
Yes.
The hit
sells.
pieces are put out.
Yeah.
And when you see a hit piece, on speaking of like Bobby Kennedy, when he was running, there was a show with John Oliver called Last Week Tonight. And in the middle of Bobby's campaign, there was a hit piece put out on that show. And there's always hit pieces on, more right-leaning or moderate-leaning people, but you won't see the opposite. So I think it's kind of like the rule of comedy, right? If either nothing's funny or everything's funny.
That's right.
So I think if you're going to go through this and make jokes about a candidate, you should be able to take the jokes as well.
Yeah. I agree. You guys?
I would say that there's been a thread interwoven within the political atmosphere in the past decade that I've seen of dehumanization, where political people talk bad about other political people or just people in general. They say really negative and dehumanizing things that remove that person from their humanhood. And that has caused an incredible rift and shift and break in how people see each other. And it's heavily influences people's opinions, and you can see the divide between people who love Trump and they don't even know why they love Trump. They've just decided that they love him. They hate Biden. They hate anybody Democratic. It's like a huge thing. They've dehumanized them. It's become us against them on either side. But the dehumanization part of it from the loud minority that has blown up in social media and just the media in general has really, really caused a lot of division, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would say that a lot of the talk wasn't, it was more respectfully done. It wasn't taking digs at people in a way that sells now. I think once we got into the middle 2000s there with the age of YouTube and then Instagram and Facebook kind of becoming on the scene and all that stuff. I mean, yeah, it started to kind of change because there was a lot more video content out there and clips and stuff that people were sharing. And these things would go viral, right? And all of a sudden, it's like, whoa, this is different. But I mean, I was still, personally, if I go back to 2008, and I was a bit younger than I am now, better looking, fitter. But if you go back to then, I was not in love with John McCain. I didn't like, he was old. He was this crusty old politician. I knew he had a phenomenal military background and record, and so I didn't judge him for that. I honored him for that, but I didn't like what he represented, kind of this old, several-decade politician who didn't speak very well. But on camera, Obama looked great, and he was like this unknown, and he spoke beautifully, and he had charisma and a smile and all this, and I'm like, that's the guy. And I voted for him in his first term. And I consider myself, I don't know what I considered myself at that age. It was like more in my earlier 30s at that time. So I was probably a little bit more left-leaning still. And then but even at that time, it wasn't, the rhetoric and all that hadn't gotten nasty yet. I feel like the nasty rhetoric kind of started happening between, and again, funny how it coincides with the age of social media, right? And everyone being able to project their thoughts and feelings in real time and share footage and put their own spin on stuff, Tim, do you have any insight or feedback on that part?
Yeah, I mean, well, I would say it was you can look at that era of social media starting, but also just the ability to have things like clickbait where we have an incentive structure, whether it's an echo chamber because a social media algorithm is giving you, they're ultimately giving you what you're going to emotionally react to the most. But then again, so does the main media outlets now because, well, what story is going to get the most clicks?
Yes, right.
The one that calls the other side Stalin or Hitler or socialist or, whatever. And to Sam's point, I see it both ways. And I personally have a side. I mean, I won't say, but
Right.
but I'm tired of seeing that where it's dehumanizing, and then even the people in the middle, unfortunately, find themselves going toward polls because now we have an incentive structure in place that pushes it. And then the final thing on top of it is, I think people, and I'm guilty of this too, we find our identity too much in politics. It used to be, I'm an American first, and then I'm a Democrat or Republican second. Now it's, I'm a Republican or I'm a Democrat, and for you to say anything negative about my candidate means you are now attacking me on a deep personal level. And it's like, to what you were saying earlier is, no, I just want to have good conversation. But now we've bad incentive structure, dehumanizing people, and then not taking it with a grain of salt, but actually finding our identity in politics. I think it's,
I mean, people used to fly the American flag on their front of their home or wherever, and it was a unifying thing and a thing to feel good about, patriotic, and we're all in this together. We're all Americans, and what I've seen is, you're right, they put the candidate ahead of country, and then not only that, so now you're like, oh, that person, they're leaning that way or voting for that person, so already I kind of don't like that person. But now there are people that have come out really attacking the country. People who say that they don't want to be Americans, or they want to leave, or they hate our country. And I'm like, well, how can you say that? Because you're still getting. How can you say you hate this country, and you've also been able to be benefited by this country? Like, you can hate things about the country. You can want change. You can hate certain representation or certain policy. But to say that you hate this country, that's, I don't know. I just don't feel like any of us are privileged enough to say that. And if you hate it so much, then my feeling is, and I'm sorry, I'm almost 50 years old. I don't hold back. Get the hell out of our country if you hate it this much. A lot of people fought and died for this country over the last 250 years to get to where we are today. So to come out and just say, I hate this country and all it stands for and all that, well, then I just think you're not giving it enough thought.
Yeah.
I think you got it. That's just superficial anger, and who knows where it's stemming from. But I feel like you don't even know why you're saying it.
I think as Floridians, we got a nice little taste of, after Helene and Milton came through, and especially where we live here in the Tampa Bay area, internet went out, power went out, and we're not talking for like an hour. We're talking for days, and for some people, they're still without it.
Yeah.
Sand came in the house, and I think we got a nice little taste that if all the systems, all the processes, all of the hard work that people put in to build this country up and have it running as efficiently as it is, that was just a quick little hors d'oeuvre of what could really happen.
Yes, to be like a third world country quickly.
Yeah.
Because the power and light company's not coming by in a couple of days to restore things. All the people that remove all the waste and all the trees and all that stuff, they're not coming by. The garbage men and women, the people supplying all the fuel, to be able to drive your car, all the truckers trucking in all the food to the grocery stores. That stuff all ends, and that's your country. That's the people that the bedrock of this country are these hard men and women, hardworking people that get up every day and go to work and show up and get stuff. And GSD, just like we talk about here, it's just, if we don't have the infrastructure that we have, that all goes away
very quickly.
And that's what's made our country so great, is this entrepreneurial, like, work hard and reap what you sow. You know what I mean? You work hard, you will get your reward. And that's what's capitalism at the end of the day. That's capitalism and entrepreneurship at its best, not socialist, where these people work hard, these people don't do crap, and then everybody just gets the same. That's socialism, and I don't believe in that for one day.
My favorite thing is when someone is pro-socialism or says, listen, before I say anything, like every country has their problems. I'm not saying America is a perfect system.
We're far from perfect.
But one of my favorite things is when someone says they hate the country or they're pro-socialism and they're anti-capitalism, but they're posting it on Twitter from their Apple iPhone. I'm like, oh, okay, that makes sense. I think to come back full circle to kind of what Sam was saying with the dehumanization, I'm not saying anyone is behind an intentional rifting of the parties or the people. Maybe there's plenty of theories about it.
Sure.
But I think that it's really interesting that you were saying people can sit down and talk about politics over a beer, walk out and be friends. My buddy, he is one side of the party, on the other side of the party, or the spectrum of politics, but
Sure.
we're best friends. But I think it's really interesting that at one point in time, no matter who you voted for, it was country first and making sure that politicians stayed in line and bringing them to justice, if they were to get out of line. Now, again, no matter who you're voting for, it seems like you can easily, first we're dehumanized, we're separated, and then you can look past your party's flaws, and it's totally okay. But I feel like in the past we've had that opportunity to say, hey, it doesn't matter who you voted for, isn't that really messed up what that person did? They really need to answer for that. But now we're against each other's throats, and I think if there is a corporate interest or whatever kind of interest might be, I mean, they're doing one hell of a job at keeping us, divided.
Well, I think we need to do more of what we're doing here.
Sure.
Yeah.
Just discussion. Get off your phone, get off of your echo chamber, and be willing to have a sometimes uncomfortable dialogue with, you hear all the time, like, oh, my racist uncle at dinner or my blue-haired niece at dinner, and we can't get along at Thanksgiving. And it's like, well, of course you can't. That's what happens when you put family with different ideas, values, and then in a room together, guess what? You're still family. So part of that is working through that, having uncomfortable conversations, and realize, in the case, I was talking about family, but we're still Americans at the end of the day. So let's hash it out. Let's have good, robust dialogue, but remain united at the end of it.
Yeah, and I think that is obviously like a really good point, and I think we definitely need more of that. And I think it needs to be balanced, because to speak to your echo chambers, there's a lot of people who will have those conversations with it. Everybody believes the same thing, maybe a little bit different, but it needs to be bigger and broader, and a level of respect given to each member, especially in family, because I may not agree with you on anything at all whatsoever. And, there just has to be a level of respect and understanding that comes with all of that I think a lot of people don't know how to respect somebody who thinks differently about them. They just find hate in their heart towards that person because they are different or think different.
I think in the last 15 years, people have found it really easy to be hateful or confrontational of someone with opposing views because of how they've been trained through social media how to do it. So their response is almost like, well, this is what I would normally type. So I'll just, or they avoid interaction altogether, like you're saying, and don't come together and have these conversations because the only way they know how to be confrontational, even respectfully, is anonymously.
Right. Right.
Yeah. And that's frightening. So, I mean, I guess it's a blessing and a curse for me. It's kind of how I've lived my whole life. It's like no one ever goes away from sitting next to me or listening to me or chatting with me, not knowing my thoughts on things. Like I'm usually very vocal. I wear my heart on my sleeve, and it's helped me and benefited me in a lot of ways, I think, because it's a communication skill. But it also backfires too, because you kind of just say everything you're thinking.
Yeah, HR knows this.
HR knows this, and I've maintained my employment status here all these years later. It's just amazing. But
I have one more point
please.
that kind of wraps it all up together. It's kind of just trying to find some balance because people sway one way or the other so hard. And it's about like learning and being willing to relearn and unlearn things. And this quote I think is really great. It's from Adam Grant. He writes a lot of great books on knowledge and learning things. And he says the core skills of learning are a critical eye and an open mind. Critical thinking is refusing to accept ideas at face value. Don't believe information until it's verified. Openness is refusing to reject ideas at face value. Don't disbelieve information until it's falsified. I think it's important for people to have an open mind in these kinds of conversations, knowing that, like, here's what I think, but maybe I haven't heard from a different perspective. So maybe hearing your thoughts on this topic or your experience with this topic changes my thought, because you have different experiences than I do, and I have different experiences than you do, and we have to be open to each other's experiences and the things that we've actually been through. And I think that's a big part of
No, it's absolutely, it's crucial. That's good. Yeah, it's well said. A lot of us make these like kind of knee-jerk decisions about things, big things and little things in our life. And this is a big thing, right? Electing a president, electing a leader for the next 4 years. But you're not, ultimately too, I kind of alluded to it at the beginning, we're not voting in one person. Mm-hmm. Let's put the people aside. You kind of have to look at what do they represent, and what do the 5,000 people that follow them into Washington represent, and what will they be working very hard for the next 4 years to implement. And those are the things that people really have to, and that's why everyone should do their homework a little bit as an American. Don't just, I like the way this person says this, or, I know, I can't even, I love these questions on the streets, where you see where they go, hey, you like so-and-so. What policy do you really like? And they're, well, I don't really know. It's like, well, then why do you even, why do you feel so strongly one way or the other? Right. You have to know what that person represents. And I think anyone listening, just do a little bit of homework. It doesn't take very long. You could do a little bit of reading and probably find anything out. They all have their own platforms and websites, and you could see their top 10 list of the policies and things that they feel strongest about, and at least have a better understanding of what you are voting for, rather than just a person that you like or hate. Because a lot of people, I think, it's gotten to the point where you're not voting for the person you like, you're voting against the person you hate. And I think it's gotten gotten to that point, which is scary. What do you guys think? Just thoughts about the popular vote versus the Electoral College? Because some people are like, they don't get it. I think some people don't understand why there's an Electoral College. I know there was a moment for me a few decades ago where I was like, whoever gets the most votes should just win, But do you guys have any stance on that or any feedback? Go ahead, Tim. Don't hold back.
I was going to say, I've got an opinion, but...
That's okay.
No, I mean, I'm definitely in favor of the Electoral College. And kind of like you, early on, if you asked me just as I was kind of entering politics and learning, I would have been in favor of the popular vote. Like, it just makes sense.
Right.
It's simple and it makes sense. Right. Whoever gets the most votes.
Right. You got 51% votes.
You get elected. Yeah. Easy peasy. But when you actually kind of look into the reasoning behind why the founders instituted the Electoral College and the very things it helps protect us against. For instance, one of the things it does is it helps protect the minority vote. And what I mean by that is not necessarily like minorities who are voting, but I mean one thing the founders were very worried about was this idea that mob rules, that the 51% would always be able to hold their opinions, their sways, and decisions over the 49%.
Right.
What this did was it kind of equalized things a little bit. That way, whoever wins needs to have a diversification of thought, constituents, and people voting for them. So it wouldn't be simply two major cities in the United States voting
that control everything,
right. And that's even within a particular party. For instance, Silicon Valley, high population in those areas. If they decided the election, well, only Republicans and Democrats would care about the issues that those people face. They might never care about those who are, say, in the blue wall. What do the blue collars face on a daily basis? Could be completely different than Silicon Valley or us here in Florida. What issues do we face? So the Electoral College introduces both the idea of if you understand the inner workings, and maybe we'll get into it on how it's structured, it's a combination of majority, but it's also a combination of states voting on a particular person, which is what kind of causes that diversification of thought to go into play. So I'm in favor of it just because I think it forces candidates not to just campaign in certain areas, but across the whole United States, and it forces them to actually care about issues that they might not care about otherwise. So I'm a big believer of it.
Any other thoughts, David, Sam?
I mean, I would agree. I think it's a valuable piece of our infrastructure as far as the government is, and it was originally established as a compromise because the founding fathers couldn't even decide which one was better, and they were just like, okay, well, let's do both of these things. And you have the popular vote makes a difference at a state level to a degree, and then you have your electors actually decide who they're supposed to, or who they're going to cast their vote for based on the state's decision. Obviously, there are sometimes states that choose opposite of their people, but ultimately, I think it's a good thing. Could it be better? Maybe, probably, but
I do marvel though at what these men were able to create in the 1770s. I mean, from the Declaration of Independence to 11 or 12 years later, creating the Constitution, and I mean, what an amazing time! And this was we're still 250 years later. We're living in a thought. We're living in an idea of breaking away from Great Britain, right? To start a new thing, a new.
What, 37 more states later too?
That's what I'm saying, right? It was 13 states originally, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's pretty phenomenal.
It's also pretty wild when you think about most of those people were pretty young.
Oh yeah, they weren't 50, 60, 70-year-old men.
Franklin was.
Right, he was a little bit older, right?
But these were young guys and really hungry for change, and that's pretty inspirational. Now I feel like you think about people that age, and you couldn't even imagine them starting a country, let alone
they're doing keg stands at
right.
University of XYZ. So yeah, I know it is pretty amazing what they established, how much thought went into it, how many checks and balances there were, and they did just this. They got together and they had tough conversations, and I'm sure it got pretty heated and pretty ugly in moments, but ultimately what they put together, what they created, was pretty fantastic. And it's obviously, I would get mad sometimes thinking of America as the peacekeeper of the world. Like, why are we the world police? But other countries all around the world do rely on us for a lot of things in a lot of ways, missionaries, right, and funding for stuff. And there's so much goodness that happens because at the heart of a lot of Americans, I think, is a desire to help and to reach out and to do something good for people who need a step up or a handout. And so much of that happens. People are so charitable and stuff, and a lot of that doesn't get the attention that it deserves. We get the opposite. We get all of the nastiness that goes on and all the stuff that sells, and then they save the last couple minutes of the newscast for that little baby was rescued story, But up until that, it's a lot of negativity, and that's what's, I think, also breeds a lot of this divisiveness and hatred and bad feelings, rather than really focusing on, look at all this goodness that's happening. Look at these neighbors helping neighbors, and this organization that did this to benefit this, and I wish that was more featured and more highlighted. You
could even have a good story and have them twist it to make it sound bad.
Yeah.
So it's pretty sad.
Yeah.
I think that's where a lot of state and more local, you can take it back all the way down to elections, but watching national news or world news, there's so much happening in the world. I can't even process a smidgen of any of it.
Yeah, we're bombarded with constant.
So if we start, instead of focusing on everything, we focus on our communities and our local and state governments, that's where we see the goodness. And news outlets actually reporting, this kid got straight A's on his report card, and then he raised $5,000 for this, neighborhood.
Right.
Like, it's your local areas, and that's where we've lost touch. We're all about what's happening across the world and across the country instead of what's happening in my backyard.
Yeah.
I think it's tough, too, on that note, because you're also forced to have an opinion on it.
Right.
The fact that it's like, well, did you hear about what's going on, like, in this war over there? What's your take on it, Chris? Like, do you believe that? Like, it's like, whoa, I don't even know. I'm struggling enough with my local community. So, you said look at the camera if we had a point. One point I want to make to our listeners is vote in your local elections.
Yeah.
Like,
it's huge.
Everybody cares about who's going to be president, and sure, that's important. Be involved in that, but also care about who your, county commissioner is, or who your maybe city administrator is.
Yeah.
Those actually arguably have a bigger impact over your day-to-day life than anything else.
It's a great point, and it was a point that I wanted to make in this conversation is, that little bit of homework, like, know what are you going to vote for when you go to vote. It's not just a presidential vote. That's one part of your ballot sheet. Do a little bit of due diligence. There's cheat sheets out there for like all these amendments and stuff, and then local government, and just look, and you can probably get a little snapshot of like what each person, is for, so that you can go there armed with a little bit more knowledge to make, to cast a vote that actually is meaningful, rather than just you filling in a bubble for
party line.
Right,
I'm
exactly.
just going to work down the party line. Well, I mean, sometimes I guess that can make sense, but in a lot of ways, I don't think it does. And it's with the two-party system that we have, right? Sometimes it's almost good for it to kind of go back and forth a little bit too, because then you're getting, some policies that kind of
Right. Balance each other.
You balance each other out rather than always being on one side or the other.
Well, to that point, and why it's not always a good thing to vote down the party line, even though sometimes I'll admit that's what I do, is because your party should be reflective of your values.
Right.
Your values shouldn't be reflective of what your party's espousing. And that means that over time there's going to be give and take. Your values might change and the party's values might change. So don't and that's why I actually think you see a lot of, lifelong Democrats might be voting Republican, or a lot of lifelong Republicans are voting Democrat. That's not a weird thing, nor should it be a weird thing, because the parties have changed a lot over the years, and all of us have changed a lot over the years.
Sure, absolutely.
But that requires doing your homework and actually kind of looking into the issues, and also get it straight from the horse's mouth. Like, what does Trump believe? What does Harris believe? Go look on their website, see what they're saying. Don't necessarily take what this person said they said, or this news organization said they said. Go get the information straight from the horse's mouth.
Yeah.
So.
And it's sad, too, that it almost takes a crisis like a 9/11 or some of these unbelievable natural disasters that you see for you to see the best of what Americans can do and really coming together on things. 9/11, people weren't talking about Republican and Democrat for probably a long time after that. They were talking about that was pretty awful what just happened to our country. We were attacked, and how do we fix that? How do we navigate that? And I know there's a whole other side to that whole thing too. If we had Steve out here, he'd be talking about did that really happen anyway, all that stuff. But when it comes down to it, I think all that stuff goes away when you get to the core of what really matters in life, which is, humanity and how you treat your neighbor and how you love on other people and help people. And that's what matters, not the car in your garage or the big TV on your wall. Like, that stuff's great, but it fades, and it doesn't ever bring true joy, true purpose, or happiness ultimately to anybody. It's like, what are you doing with your life? How did you help somebody? How did you make someone else's life better? What ripple effect did you create to enhance or improve your community, So, and we are all capable of doing it in little ways, whether it's being an awesome parent, being a great neighbor, being a coach, having a small business in your town, and just being awesome at doing that. I'll give you one quick example, and I know kind of going off the rails, but we're closing up shop here anyway with this conversation. But just the other day, I stopped after baseball. It was late. There was no way we were cooking any food for the kids. It was almost 9 o'clock at night. So I went to Steak and Shake, and I'm doing my order. The guy couldn't have been nicer over the drive-through, and even my daughter mentioned it. And then we go up to pull up, and again, he just like he gave us an extra drink, and I said, "Oh no, we just ordered these 3. I didn't order this one." And so he reluctantly took it back. He's like, "Oh yeah, you're right." And he put it back, and then he was like, "You sure you don't want it? You can just have it. You sure?" And I'm like, "Are you forcing a free drink on me?" I'm like, "Fine, I'll take it." And he was just in the interaction. I don't know anything about the guy, nothing, but I do know that he treated us so nicely through the intercom, and then when we pulled up, and then just that interaction, it makes me really enjoy. Now I want to go back there again. Like, the food's good too. I mean, the burgers are good. Like the fries, I like it all. But I want to go back there because I had a good experience. I was treated very nicely. The customer service was terrific. Mm-hmm. And I think if there was more of that happening, and on little levels, right? Like, that made my night better. And that was just some dude I ordered a fast food burgers from. Sure. It's like we're all capable of that. Whether you're a waitress or you work in construction or whatever, man. I had a great interaction with my pest control guy the other day, and he's like, and I was in my coach's stuff. He's like, "You coach?" And I was like, "Yeah." And then he texts me after he left. He's like, "By the way, man, way to step up and be a coach. We need more dads like you." And like, I was getting a compliment from the pest control guy. I'm like, "Thank you so much, man. That really means a lot. Thank you." And it was awesome. And it's like those little things matter. And I just wish that more Americans were like looking for those opportunities to treat others respectfully and kindly. And I don't know what his political views are, and I don't care.
Well, and I think to that point, on the flip side, if you come across somebody who's not nice or not respectful or like clearly not giving you a great interaction, treat them with a little bit of grace and patience. You don't know what they're going through.
True.
They don't know what you're going through. Maybe she just lost her dad and is trying to wait tables so she can make money to take a flight up to be there for her family.
Right.
Like, you have no idea what people are going through, but you could take that bad interaction, immediately go to Yelp, say, "I'm never going here again because blah, 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 blah." So we have so much of that happening too.
Yes.
Like, nobody knows how to extend grace or patience or understanding anymore. And look for the good in everybody, even if they don't treat you well.
Yeah, overlook it, and sometimes you don't know what the heck's going on with somebody. It's a good point.
I'm sure we keep hammering 2 lessons over and over in this conversation, which is don't judge a book by its cover and go by the golden rule. Treat others the way you want to be treated.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's a very good point. Tim, anything on that? I mean, come on, you're a pastor, bro. You got to have something good.
Well, no, I mean, there is I'm not going to make the argument from a pastor perspective of, we've taken, God and that's out of the country and that's why things are crumbling. But we have, and I would argue that that's led to a lot of issues. But okay, even to maybe an unbeliever or somebody who doesn't believe in God who's listening to this podcast, or even the believers, having that as the foundation, that treat others as you want to be treated, and especially speaking to the Christians, you have a responsibility to. Mm-hmm. That's what your God has commanded you to do. So I think it goes back to dehumanizing people. When we abandon in theology, we call it imago Dei. We're image bearers of God. It's littered throughout. You see it in Genesis, but this idea that we have value because God created us. Mm-hmm. And if you have value and you're made in God's image, by dehumanizing someone, you're ultimately, it's not just a sin against that person, it's a sin against God. Mm-hmm. So all that, serving as a foundation for what we're talking about in this conversation is, look, when somebody disagrees with you politically, don't assume the worst in them. That in fact, they probably have the same motivation as you. You got Republicans who, let's not spend too much money, and you have Democrats who are like, but we need to help people, and those are both good things, and their intention with one another. And so does that mean that those who want to help people are trying to, just waste a bunch of money, or that those who are trying to be conservative in our finances are unloving? No, neither one of those are true. Now, certainly, there's bad actors, there's people with bad motivations, but stop assuming that someone has a bad motivation. They might just be approaching the problem differently.
Yeah.
And then you can have the robust conversation, duke it out, but keep the main thing. They're an image bearer of God. Treat them with respect, humanize them, and then we can have a robust dialogue.
And I think we ultimately want most of the same things,
Yeah.
For people that are married with children, we want the same types of things for our children, right? We want them to be safe. We want them to be healthy. We want them to feel loved and supported. And that looks different from one family to the next, but ultimately we want the same stuff, and I would like to think that, things always are cyclical, right? So I'd like to think that the divisiveness and the rhetoric and the insanity that we kind of witness all the time in these news outlets and on the internet, hopefully it kind of settles down at some point. I can't imagine it can't escalate forever, because I guess if it does, we're not going to have a country to be in anymore. But I would like to think that it can come back to some form of status quo, if there even is one, but where people just are more tolerant and more truthful. Mm-hmm. And tolerance works both ways, right? Rather than seems like it's gotten over.
I would just piggyback on that. Just tolerance also doesn't mean avoiding a problem,
correct,
or not addressing it.
Right.
It means that, again, that robust dialogue, that we can come together and realize that, hey, somebody else might have a different opinion, but that doesn't mean you ignore the fact that somebody else might have a different opinion. Right. And just, So, tolerance, I would just say, don't, for those listening, don't misconstrue what that actually looks like.
Well, it used to mean what it meant, and then it kind of, things have gotten redefined. It's like loving somebody all of a sudden became accepting of everything. It's like, no, that doesn't work that way. Do you love everything your kid does? No. Sometimes it's tough love, or it's a disciplinarian approach to love, where you're trying to do what's best for the person even though they don't see it. So it's tough. We're in a very difficult age, as Sam alluded to earlier. We're getting hit with just so much every single day, with all the ads and the negative and the anti this, and it's overwhelming, I think, for people to absorb all of this. They say in one day you get a year's worth of information. If you go back to a quieter time, a couple hundred years ago, we're just spoon-fed so much, it's overwhelming. That's why we don't have room for phone numbers. Do you guys have any phone numbers memorized anymore, other than maybe your spouse's? You know what I'm saying? Like just a few. But if you go back to the 1980s, I knew every phone number of every person I knew at the time. In all
fairness, it was 3 numbers short.
It was only, I was going to say, there weren't that many phone numbers, and it was a little bit shorter, right? Yeah, locally, you didn't need the area code. Yeah,
couldn't afford long distance.
I know, right? I didn't have that much change in my pocket. But I appreciate you guys. Hopefully, we were able to have a civil conversation, respectful of each other, and I would like to think that people on the other end listening could do the same, whether it's a podcast or not. You don't have to have a podcast to have a meaningful conversation with somebody and be a good listener.
I'd say the only thing we haven't really addressed is really where the problem really started. It really started when we stopped wearing suits and stopped smoking on airplanes. So if you're listening at home, wear your suit and start smoking on airplanes again.
There are still ashtrays. That's always kind of bothered me. Like, why is there still an ashtray on this airplane? Like, all these decades later, you guys took this smoking away a long time ago, and yet you're still making airplanes with.
This is the tombstone of the cigarettes.
These just are recycled. These are okay. Yeah. Or is it a good place for like putting your gum in a wrapper and throwing it in there? Yeah. It's like a mini garbage can.
Yeah, letting the staff take care of it, letting the Spirit Airlines people worry about it.
And suits.
Suits and smoking.
And what about hats with suits for the men?
It depends on the hat.
I like the ladies with the big dressy horse racing hats. Those are good too. Those are good. That's a good look.
I had to look at Sam to see what her take was.
You're not
on
a
that.
hat. You're not a hat type. I mean, you wear a baseball cap.
Yeah, I'll wear a ball cap. Yeah. I don't really
You don't
big.
like those big elaborate.
I have one that I like to wear to the beach sometimes, but
okay.
it gets in the way, knock
Yeah.
into people. Yeah.
Yeah.
Fun, but
Well, it's been a really a real treat, and you guys had so much good stuff to share. I really enjoyed what everybody had to say. I think it was really, really helpful and constructive, and hopefully it resonates with our listeners. And this will actually launch this episode, I think, the day after.
Ooh.
So November 6th, this releases.
Hopefully this ages well.
Yeah, hopefully this ages well.
sure.
We never quite know, do we? But no, but this is good. This has been a joy, and I just appreciate all of you being willing to do it. And I think we pulled it off. So thank you.
Thanks for having us.
None of us are leaving with hatred in our hearts.
I'll give it time.
or pink slips.
Or pink slips, right? I'm still employed. Just making sure, Tim. Everything's good. All right. All right. Well, this has been another episode here on the Strong by Design podcast. We are starting to get warm, and things are heating up out here in the compound with no fan on. So I think we all need some air conditioning at this point.
It's about that time.
It's about that time, and we just really appreciate you listeners for tuning in, for finding our show, for coming back, for sharing it with friends and family. Please do that with this particular episode. And we hope you continue to come back and support us. Every Wednesday, a new episode drops here on Strong by Design. Remember, you are made in God's image to have a strong body, mind, and spirit. And we just love you, and we pray for you all the time. God bless.
Thank you so much for listening to the Strong by Design podcast. If you found value in today's episode, please subscribe so that more people can find out about our show. Plus, you don't want to miss any future episodes with the amazing guests and topics we have lined up for you.